Join Wondery Plus to listen to Secret Sauce 1 week early and ad-free in the Wondery app. Download the Wondery app in your Apple or Google Play mobile app store today.
Hi, I'm David Brown, the host of Wondery's show Business Wars. And in our latest series, drug makers defy the odds in their race against COVID-19. Listen to Vaccine Wars on Business Wars on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Wondery app. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen 1 week early and ad-free.
One of America's deadliest school shootings took place at my high school in Colorado. After the massacre, our country wondered, will our schools ever be safe again? My name is Amy Over. I'm a survivor of the Columbine mass shooting and host of the new podcast, Confronting Columbine. Binge the entire series of Confronting Columbine right now, early and ad-free when you join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
From Wondery, I'm Samuel Donner.
And I'm John Fry.
And this is Secret Sauce. So, John, over the last 3 episodes, we've watched how Airbnb co-founder and CEO Brian Chesky turned his little dream of people sleeping on strangers' air mattresses into literally a $100 billion company that has changed the way we live and travel.
Yeah, they've built something massive, but it was a hell of a roller coaster to be on.
Oh, dude, even that is an understatement of the year. Like, we're talking about a company that was launched during the 2008 financial crisis, and they didn't just find a way to survive, they have been thriving since then.
Yeah, Airbnb has been through Ransackgate, racial discrimination on their platform, regulation that threatened to shut them down. Someone literally tried to steal their idea. They've been through the ring of fire. It's safe to say that. And Sam, you have to take a listen to this clip of Brian Chesky on CNBC where he discusses his toughest crisis yet. Surviving the pandemic.
We spent 12 years building Airbnb's business and lost almost all of it in the matter of 4 to 6 weeks. What's happened over the last 3-4 months, though, is something else entirely. Something remarkable happened, which was the end of May, early June, we had the same volume of bookings in the United States as a year before without any marketing, zero marketing whatsoever. I think this is just showing that people are yearning for something. They're yearning for connection. And they want to be connected to each other, to the communities. They want to get outside. And so I think that travel is going to come back and it's going to be different.
All right, John, we're headed to Tulum right now. Let's go. Pack your bags, bring your sunscreen. All right, maybe not yet. But John, like as more people get fully vaccinated for COVID, travel is going to explode. And Airbnb, I think, is going to reap the benefits.
Oh, yeah. Big bucks Brian Chesky is always looking for what's next. He is an unstoppable force.
And actually, we're pretty lucky today because we're joined by someone who has watched the man, the myth, the Silicon Valley legend turn his itsy-bitsy company from a peer-to-peer lodging service into an experience-based destination that now has over 150 million users.
Yeah, I actually heard that our guest spent some time with Chesky in a yurt in Topanga.
Wait. What's a yurt?
Well, I'm going to have to let our guests explain that. We're joined today by Katrina Brooker. She's a journalist and contributor who has been published at Fortune, Forbes, New York Times, Bloomberg, and even Vanity Fair. Over the last few years, she's followed Brian Chesky very closely and has reported on Airbnb's growth.
And she did this really cool article in Vanity Fair, and it's called Airbnb Hits the Road. And basically what it did is it talked about Airbnb's expansion and providing travelers with these really memorable experiences designed by locals. And Katrina had a front row seat to the future of what Airbnb would be. So without further ado, hi, Katrina. Welcome to Secret Sauce.
Hi, Sam. Hi, John.
Yeah. Where are you calling us from?
I'm in New York City. So if you hear some honking in the background, that's what's going on.
Yeah. That will be the proof that you were actually.
Yes. It's verified that she is in New York City.
John and I have been like super just deep into the stories of like startups and specifically Airbnb. And I know that you have been interested in startups and been writing about startups for a little bit. So how did you start writing about startups and why did you get into that?
The way that I started reporting on Silicon Valley was through this story that I did on these venture capitalists whose job it was to go and find whoever was going to be the next big thing. They were at that time looking for the next Facebook, and actually one of the companies that they invested in was Airbnb. So my editor at the time was really interested in doing something about Airbnb. And at that time, I had read stories about kind of the beginnings, the origins of Airbnb, and they were definitely starting to get big and they were on my radar screen, but I had never interviewed or met Brian Chesky. He was always talked about as sort of this very nice guy. You know, like all of these entrepreneurs have these different personalities that you hear about. And so
do they
I'd
tend to be true? Like the personalities, or or is it just good marketing?
Well, in Brian's case, it's funny because I've since then had this conversation with him about his having this reputation as a nice guy, and he is a really nice guy. But what's funny is that comes with this double-edged sword. There is these questions that he's had to sort of deal with about, is he tough enough for what it's going to take for where he is now, which is in the public markets. But he's much more complicated than just a nice guy. I think what people respond to is that he's pretty direct and honest. And I think that there are a lot of people in the Silicon Valley ecosystem who aren't. And I think that that's sort of what has earned him this reputation, that people feel like they can trust him in a way that they don't always trust billionaires roaming around the valley.
I have friends that think all billionaires are evil, and maybe he's contradicting, or maybe he's
very aware of that reputation, and I would say, especially now, it's very much on his mind.
I feel like you're painting like a really cool picture of where you feel he is now, but I'm curious about like before you actually met him, when his reputation was just a reputation to you. What was that first encounter like?
Well, so I do remember being worried when I got assigned the story that it was going to be really boring, because he had always been sort of called this nice guy. There had been a lot of stories around him. And so I remember specifically saying, I don't want to just show up in his office and kind of chat about the beginning of Airbnb. I kind of want to see him somewhere where he's not that comfortable. And so he invited me to a yurt in Topanga Canyon.
Wait, a yurt? Can you describe what a yurt looks like really quick?
You know, it's funny. I didn't know what a yurt was. I'm from New York City. I'd never been to a yurt. It's sort of this big round tent. They have them in Mongolia and Topanga Canyon. And there was this...
The only two places yurts exist, Mongolia and Topanga Canyon.
And it's sort of this big white round tent. And you know, when you get inside, it's actually really cozy. He had rugs and comfortable couches, and there was a little outhouse, and it was kind of this almost like hippie compound. The screenwriter who lived there, he had agreed to be part of this experiment that Airbnb was doing, which at the time they hadn't launched yet, and it was called Airbnb Experiences. And Brian wanted he and I to both experience the quote Airbnb experience simultaneously to sort of see what it was like. And the idea was that you go to this very strange place and meet people that you would normally never meet and kind of see what happens. When he showed up, they hadn't been told that the CEO of Airbnb was going to show up. And actually, he didn't introduce himself as the CEO of Airbnb. And so we all kind of were sitting around.
Wait, so he's intentionally going incognito?
Yeah, it was, what is that called? A mystery shopper? It was like experiencing.
Makes sense.
Secret CEO.
Yeah. So they did not know. And I didn't say anything. And because I was really interested to see also how he just interacted with the other people there.
And how did he interact?
Oh my God, he got so into it because the screenwriter was trying to get us to come up in 1 hour with a sort of plot line and the basic storyboard. And the other people there were all from LA.
So basically, Brian was trying to create a guest experience with a screenwriter where they all collaborate on a story?
Yeah, people who were either actors or a lot of people who were actually interested in trying to write their own screenplay. And Brian was right in there kind of throwing out this idea, what if you live parallel lives in a parallel universe? I mean, we started going down these really crazy roads.
Wow, this is like Brian's way of gathering data. He's just sitting in a yurt with a bunch of artists writing a screenplay. Now, that's what I call an experience. So how did it go?
I mean, he is someone who is so meticulous about details and so meticulous about understanding how people think about Airbnb. He is someone who knows his business down to its core. So It's funny, I happened to be on this experience with him, but I know that he did other versions of that with other experiences before launching the actual product. He was really asking all the people there questions about not even so much how they enjoyed the experience, but he wanted to know who they were, like where they came from, why they decided to sign up for it, what drew them in. And so there's something like when you're watching him do that, you kind of realize what his connection is with this company that he and his co-founders have created.
We get support from NetSuite by Oracle.
If you're listening to this and you're a business owner, you know that running a business is tough. In fact, tough might be the understatement of the century.
But you might be making it harder on yourself than necessary.
Don't let QuickBooks and spreadsheets slow you down anymore. It's time to upgrade to NetSuite.
That's right. Stop paying for multiple systems that don't give you the information you need when you need it. Ditch the spreadsheets and all the old software you've outgrown.
Because now is the time to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle, the world's #1 cloud business system.
NetSuite gives you visibility and control over your financials, HR, inventory, e-commerce, and more. Everything you need all in one place instantaneously.
So whether you're doing $1 million or hundreds of millions in revenue, you'll save time and money with NetSuite.
Get started today. Join the over 24,000 companies using NetSuite right now. And let NetSuite show you how they'll benefit your business with a free product tour at netsuite.com/sauce.
Schedule that free product tour right now at netsuite.com/sauce.
One more time, that's netsuite.com/sauce. John and I have just been looking at him and seeing, how he interacts with his design background and how that allows him to understand customers. And this might be almost where he's most at home, where he's testing out a product and seeing how it affects other people. But I think in the same way that you can develop a really, really good idea when you feel at home and safe, the crises has been an amazing development tool for Airbnb too. Right, John?
Yeah. And I think they've been through a lot, but most recently, when COVID happened, they ended up doing a bunch of different measures. I was just curious, Katrina, on your take on how Brian handled the COVID situation and everything that they had to do there.
I think, first of all, it remains to be seen, because I think that we are really just in phase 1 of the COVID crisis. And what's going to be much more significant is, how he handles this next phase, which is, what's emerging from the wreckage and what the world is going to sort of look like, what travel is going to look like once we come out of it. But in the acute moment, I think that, his company nearly collapsed. And I think for a lot of people, when I think in some 3 or 4 week period, you have revenues drop by 80%. I mean, it's a body blow that most companies can't recover from. And the interesting thing about Brian is he almost becomes tuned into a crisis in a way. If most people kind of get panicky and unsure what to do, he almost has that Neo looking at the Matrix and things start to slow down. And I really think that is what happened for him. I remember having a conversation with him where he told me he could almost see things were unfolding like they do in a movie. I think in the beginning, he understood very, very quickly, and probably quicker than a lot of other companies, that Airbnb was going to need a lot of money to get themselves through this. And so the speed that he raised $2 billion, it was kind of eye-popping, shocking. I mean, it was really amazing. And that sort of set a tone for the other startups.
What about Brian made it so easy for him to raise $2 billion? That seems like a massive feat.
I've spent a lot of time trying to understand this. Going into the crisis, Airbnb was in very good financial state. I mean, it's a very cash-friendly business. What was appealing to investors was that if you believed that eventually the travel business would come back, Airbnb was a pretty good bet. The other side is that Brian had built up years and years of goodwill around Silicon Valley. So there was this sense that people were just rooting for him. Real friendships and connections over the years in ways that not every other founder has. And so there were people who came out of the woodworks for him who really wanted this company to survive.
I think it's really interesting that you said that like Brian was able to, pull in all these favors. Like, do you have like an example or a story of that where it's like Brian went way above and beyond like a normal tech CEO would do for someone else?
He would be very generous about introducing people to, let's say, venture capitalists. He is one of those entrepreneurs who a venture capitalist will definitely, one, take their call, but they'll also take the call of the person who he recommends. And that actually in Silicon Valley is very important. That's incredibly valuable. That's probably more valuable than money. And so I think that he's someone who has demonstrated just this willingness to be generous in that way.
So I'm curious if you think his design background helped him in any way weather all the crises that Airbnb faced.
One of the things that I think is really, really important to understand about Brian is that he is really an artist. I mean, and so his whole world up until he started Airbnb was about art and connecting kind of images with emotions. And I mean, he spent all of his time in an artist studio. I mean, he's actually a really talented artist.
Huh.
And so I think his whole lens of looking at the world is very different from your typical business guy, which is, you take accounting classes, you take an economics class, you learn marketing and how to do graphs and stuff like that. That was not his upbringing or his training at all. It was, trying to understand people and how they live in the world and how they connect with each other. I mean, I think that now more than ever, having gone through the crisis, he sees himself more as a creative than as a business person. And I think up until the crisis, he was a little bit fighting with himself over whether he was supposed to be more businesslike or whether he was supposed to be more creative. And I think at core, it's the creative side of him that has made the business work and probably has made, the business side of him what it is today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think not only him as a creative, but also it sounds like empathy has been a huge differentiator and like asset for him, like from his childhood up to now. And like he used his empathy when like dealing with the COVID situation and, just building the platform, like building community. It seems like creativity and community were like two really big things for him.
Yeah. And I think, when I first met him, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that he had studied Walt Disney. And when I say studied, I mean studied not the company, but the man, like the actual cartoonist Walt Disney. And he sort of told me this epic story about how Walt Disney created his first animated feature-length film, Snow White, and the agony that he had to go to just, I mean, I had never realized that creating Snow White was this epic story, but it turns out that it was. The reason why I think Walt Disney resonated with him so much was that Disney was also at his core a creative person, and that he was much more interested in kind of creating a story like the story of Snow White than figuring out how many ticket sales were going to come out of it. I think that is a big part of who Brian is. I think that definitely makes him different from a lot of your typical Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. And he is not a coder, a software engineer. He didn't go to Stanford. He went to RISD. People who are at RISD, they work in an artist studio. If they collaborate on ideas, which is different from, in other schools, it might be considered cheating if you're like, hey, I don't know what to do with my project over here. Artists kind of will jump in and be like, how about a splash of red here or whatever it is. And so that was his training. It really has influenced him throughout. And I don't think he's lost any part of that, even though, now he really is a businessman and he's a CEO. But at core, I think that's the part of him that drives at least a big part of the engine.
I'm like curious because it seems like John said, like empathy is such a big driver. Are there examples of him using that empathy, that design background to really like understand and empathize with the people who are part of Airbnb, like the people who are part of that community?
I think one of the things that he's spent a lot of time trying to figure out is this mistake that he made early on in the crisis that was devastating to the host, which was when travel stopped, he made an offer that if you had rented something on Airbnb, you could get all of your money back, no questions asked. And that on the surface was kind of the right thing to do, right? Because people made all these plans for traveling and they wanted to cancel because they wouldn't be able to go. But what ended up happening was the hosts were really devastated because they were suddenly out. I think it was $1 billion all collectively. So these were individual people who were just losing hand over fist, money that was going towards mortgages or towards their retirement then in danger of losing their homes. And so I know that moment was deeply troubling for him. And so he was attacked for it.
We actually had a whole debate about this exact thing where we were like wondering who was hurt more, like the hosts or the guests. And like John and I were kind of debating on
where did you guys land? Where did you guys land on that?
I thought
the
host got hurt more. Yeah.
And I was personally on the side of the individuals.
This is sort of, where Brian sits because he has to please everybody. Airbnb does not work if you don't have the hosts and the guests. And up until the crisis, everything was kind of symbiotic. The hosts were happy because the guests were coming. And this was unlike anything that he'd ever experienced before, where his hosts and his guests were actually at odds en masse around the world. So it's not like he could shore up one group against the other. Someone was going to lose money. And so Airbnb was not in a position to cover all the costs. I think, as you know, they put in $250 million. $10 million was Brian's personal money. And I think Nate and Joe, the other two founders, put in their own money too. But, at the same time, it didn't cover everything. And for him, the hosts and the guests are equal because one can't exist without the other. And so traditionally companies, especially publicly traded companies, are very focused on just one of their stakeholders, which is the shareholders. And I think by law, they're all required to prioritize their shareholders. And I think Brian, and I think other CEOs are starting to feel this way too, which is that a company's role is much broader than that, and that it has a responsibility to everyone who's connected to it. And that's not always very easy. And that's how you end up getting into these situations, just like you asked, which is more important, the host or the guests. In other iterations of business, you'd side with one and back them all the way. But I think that Brian, probably in an ongoing way, will have to learn how to navigate.
When you're managing a team, it can be hard to get everyone on the same page, especially when your freelancers go rogue.
Now, don't get us wrong, we're not knocking freelancers, but sometimes it feels like it can be tough to find great ones.
Exactly. But with our sponsor, Fiverr Business, it's easy to find and manage top talent.
That's right, John. Fiverr Business gives you access to an all-star team of super freelancers. Sounds like a little superhero. Plus, all the tools and support you need to easily integrate them into your existing workflow.
Yeah, to start with, they've got a team of dedicated business success managers that'll help match you with the best talent for your team. No more endless guessing in interviews.
Once you've found the perfect freelancer, whether you're hiring someone to design a logo or for voiceover, data entry, translation, anything you can dream up, with Fiverr Business, you can collaborate with your team, manage projects, and share freelancers all in one workspace. I'm actually, John, I think you know, but I've been in the midst of recruiting this past week, and finding great talent has been a nightmare. And interviewing all these people has been insane, like finding great writers, finding editors, finding outreach people.
Big headache.
And Fiverr is definitely something that has helped me expedite that process. Every time I need to find someone, Fiverr just makes it easier.
Yeah, collaborating online hasn't been this easy since, well, ever, really.
Yeah.
And right now, you can sign up for Fiverr Business absolutely free for the first year.
Get 1 year free and save 10% on your purchase on Fiverr Business with the promo code SAUCE.
Just go to fiverr.com/business and don't forget promo code SAUCE.
Hey, John, do we have a little nickname for our listeners yet? Like saucies or saucers or sauceroonies?
We definitely need one. I'm kind of leaning towards saucers, like spill the sauce, maybe. That could be a thing.
Or like, hey, man, this show is out of this world. Check out the flying saucers that are flying with us on this journey. All right, well, bad jokes aside, I just wanted to address them directly, the flying saucers, to tell them about how great our newest sponsor, Mack Weldon, is.
Oh, yes. They deserve to be addressed because we've been enjoying their stuff.
Oh, we've been enjoying our stuff hella. So like John and I are, you might be starting to get back out into the world this spring. And no matter where your adventures take you, you're going to want to bring the comfort and style of Mack Weldon along for the ride.
Yeah, trust us, your closet is definitely going to thank you. Whether it's hoodies, polos, tees, or active shorts, everything in the Mack Weldon collection mixes and matches seamlessly to fit in with your wardrobe.
From working out, going to a work date, Mack Weldon is for everyday life.
Ooh, a work date. Yeah, totally. Ooh. I love that they have this.
That's what we're on right now.
Exactly. Intimate.
Ooh, late night recording session.
Yeah, totally. And I love that they have this wide range of customized fabrics. Like they have the 18-hour dry knit, the warm knit, and the silver fabrics. And I mean, these things can keep up with you no matter what your day looks like.
Oh, definitely. So I got 2 white undershirts from them, and I am really paranoid about wearing white because I think I'm just going to mess it up completely and spill hot
spill
sauce.
Magnet.
Oh, yes, exactly. But actually, it's pretty spill resistant, and it fits so well, and it feels amazing. I also got some of their pants, and I look like I have the butt of the century in them. So.
I was just about to say I got a few pairs of my underwears, and my bum has never been looking better. Let me be honest. Let me be honest.
For 20% off your first order, visit mackweldon.com/sauce and enter the promo code SAUCE. That's mackweldon.com/sauce. Promo code SAUCE for 20% off.
Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics.
So something that I think John and I have both noticed about Airbnb is there's this cult-like following. Like there's a literal party, the Airbnb Open, that happens every year just celebrating how great Airbnb is. And so I'm wondering, how does this cult-like following translate into the actual Airbnb community?
It's going to be really interesting to see because I think that there's the Airbnb pre-COVID and there's the Airbnb post-COVID. And I think pre-COVID, the Airbnb brand was sort of the ultimate cult brand, and that it had this following that was very committed and passionate because people kind of bought into this ethos where you're not just traveling, you're connecting with other people, you're sharing their homes, you're sharing their lives. And what's going to be interesting is because travel stopped, now we'll see what it looks like post-COVID. Will people want to connect in the same way? Will they want to connect in different ways? I mean, I think what saved Airbnb through this crisis were these local trips that people have been taking. And so I think what we saw is that there's definitely people want to be out there and they want to be traveling and they do want to be with other people. But it'll be interesting to see how that changes post-COVID. I mean, Brian believes, I think, that the core of Airbnb's job is to connect people around the world, and how that evolves post-COVID. I think there's a lot of questions around that because I think we sort of have to see what happens with travel and how it comes back.
And I feel like in moments where they need saving, it's like they just come back to design. Like it seems just to be like a core competency.
I mean, this is why I brought up Walt Disney, the way Walt Disney sort of storyboarded his stories. Like, I think that there's a picture in Brian's mind of something that he's painting for Airbnb. And I think that he sees it visually rather than in balance sheets and financial statements. It's almost like he's got this canvas and he's knows that he has it partway painted and he's got the colors and the outlines of what he's painting. But I think now that he's a public CEO, we're going to see really how this is going to come together.
It's almost like, as a part of him being a creative over a businessman, like it's almost like he's switching the narrative from like pitch decks to portraits, right? Like instead of putting together a slideshow and financials and like spreadsheets, he's like thinking picture first. Do you have any examples of
big picture
kind of things that he's storyboarded? Because I
Yeah,
think he's done that in the
actually, I
past as
do.
well, right? Yeah.
I do actually remember going to his office and seeing an actual storyboard that he created of a like Airbnb member from the moment they leave their house to the moment they get to their Airbnb. And he had it mapped out like a movie storyboard, what happens, who they meet with, where they are. And it wasn't just that it was visual, it was an actual narrative. You could see how he was thinking about all the steps, the details, the minutia matter to him a lot. And what I saw was someone who looks through the world through people's stories. Like there's a storyteller in him. I remember he once told me this quote by Charles Eames. Hold on. The role of the designer is that of a very good, thoughtful host, anticipating the needs of his guests. So it's sort of
So
like that connection that he has as a designer to what Airbnb does. That's sort of the essence of how he thinks about the world. And I think that's not going to change. Where travel goes and how many people he brings into Airbnb or doesn't or loses, we don't know.
I love the quote. Yeah. I think it's interesting, like both as a creative and also you touched a little bit earlier on how he's shifting the narrative from I am serving shareholders to actually I at least will equally serve, the other stakeholders like the hosts, the guests.
I think what's really significant right now about Airbnb being public and Brian being where he is that this is a moment where Silicon Valley CEOs are under a lot of heat for unintentionally creating this very strange dynamic that we're in where, we don't know what their intentions are. We don't know whether we're being spied on. And, Brian and Airbnb are the next generation. So he's not the Facebook, Google generation. He's the next generation. And I think that he's in a position where he can look at the mistakes of the past and make decisions about where he wants to go next. And if things keep going the way they've been going, Airbnb will be the next big tech company, and it will have lots of levers and it will have a lot of power through its platform, through people that it connects, and through its resources, in all the ways that the other tech companies have a lot of power. And I think that he's in a position to maybe choose more wisely what he will do with that. And this is where it becomes tricky because he will be under pressure from the stock market, from shareholders to grow, because that's what they're going to want to see. You have to justify the fact that you're a $100 billion company and that you have this huge stock price. And simultaneously, he has these other stakeholders to think about who are his employees, who are his hosts, his members, and then all the people who are connected to that. So that means the communities that Airbnb goes into. And historically, Airbnb has had a lot of issues with different cities around the world, including my own city in New York. And I think that in this post-COVID world, he has an opportunity to kind of reset some of these dynamics that Silicon Valley has had with communities. If he can navigate that, it'll be really powerful for other entrepreneurs to see, but then also, the communities that all of these companies impact.
Yeah, I'm thinking I feel like he's going to have a really big impact on housing in the future, not just for the people in Airbnb, but in the communities at large. What do you think, Sam?
I feel like he's going to be shaped, going back to what you said about this new age of startups and companies that are going to have take control from maybe the Facebooks and lead us maybe in a bit more positive direction. Airbnb is not just our virtual lives. It is our life in the real world. It's where we could be living. And it seems just from John and I's own experience, we have a lot of friends that are living in Tulum in an Airbnb and working from there. And so like it seems like Airbnb is shaping the future of just how and where people live. And so I'm wondering, where do you see that going, and how is that progressing from your perspective, and where is that progressing to?
So I think this is so fascinating because I don't think we can put the genie back in the bottle. Now that we know we can all work from anywhere, I think people are going to want to keep doing that. And so your friends in Tulum, they might in 6 months want to go, I don't know, to Amsterdam. And that's a real possibility because people have found ways to work, especially, if you're someone who would traditionally be in an office, you don't have to be in that office. And I know that for Airbnb, they see that as, from a business standpoint, as a very big new potential business, which is not just short-term stays, but longer-term stays where people kind of live in new cities, through Airbnb. And in a way, I think Airbnb, because it's sort of this connection between the tech world and the real world, has a little bit been a reflection of where we all are going. I mean, I think that that's why it's so interesting to look at as a company. And so if they're sort of seeing this movement, and I do think they are seeing that, where people want to stay in different cities that they maybe haven't stayed in before and stay longer, I think that shift is already happening, and it probably is just going to keep going. I don't think anyone is necessarily going to just rush back into 5 days a week, 10 hours a day in an office. I mean, I don't know anyone who wants
this,
to.
return to the the humans of 10,000 years ago, like hunter-gatherer tribes that were nomadic going across the plains, and now we're returning to being nomads once again.
What people, I think, are seeing possibilities that they didn't envision before when they thought they had to just go in 5 days a week to an office. One thing that I think is great is that travel is now not necessarily just you go to Paris and London and kind of New York City, but people are feeling more open to exploring smaller places, off the beaten path places. I mean, these other communities, smaller communities, I think stand to benefit from travel in ways that maybe they didn't before, because we're kind of more open to going to different places and less, kind of tourist book type of places.
Yeah, and I think it's also just because we're looking towards more experiential opportunities. And in an increasingly autonomous society, it seems like people are going to be starved for that experience and that human connection. I see Airbnb as an outlier, as someone who is not running towards automation, but instead is grounding themselves in human experiences.
So I think with Airbnb, they understand that their secret sauce, and that's your show. But the secret sauce is sort of...
Feel free.
Well, it's really understanding that sort of human need to actually have experiences with other people. We all kind of have come to understand that material things just don't matter that much to us anymore, as much as the actual moments that we have with either people we care about or meeting new people. And so I think that moving forward, if Airbnb sort of stays down that route, then it's going to find a way to justify that it is in fact a $100 billion company. And I think because we've all spent so much time on technology, the real life part of it is going to be much more powerful going forward. And so I do think that creating experiences, not just, here's a room to stay in, and here's your guidebook, enjoy, is going to be really important to, not just people who go on Airbnb, but people everywhere.
Yeah, that definitely seems like it would be the secret sauce of Airbnb, like you said. But I think John and I are also wondering, thinking about and recapping all of the research that we've looked into about Brian, what is his secret sauce? And I don't know, John, what do you think?
I think a big question that's in my mind since you brought it up, Facebook is I'm pretty sure worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So I'm curious, as Brian goes from the 100 billion mark to growing to become, maybe a comparable to like a Facebook or a Google in the future, like, how do you think he won't become Mark Zuckerberg?
I don't know how to answer that, because I don't actually think Mark Zuckerberg started out saying, I want to be the guy who's going to, end up manipulating elections. I don't think that, and this is where
Totally
the issue with Silicon Valley is I don't think any of these companies or their CEOs, their intention is we want to, have the power to like change the direction of history and, politics around the world. But the size and the scale that they now have, it almost becomes hard for them not to. And I think what Brian is doing now is he's acknowledging that that's very real, and that he's in a position where he has to take actions and, and make decisions that aren't necessarily going to make everyone happy all the time. So, I don't know how that's going to play out. I just know that he's asking himself those questions in a meaningful way. And he also has been talking to other people about, he has sort of this group of mentors that he goes to for advice on a lot of these issues. So
we know he went to Mark Zuckerberg for advice. So do you think he asked Mark Zuckerberg, hey, how do I not be like you?
That would be an interesting conversation to eavesdrop on. But no, I know that he talks to Warren Buffett and Barack Obama and gets advice from them. So, he's definitely interested in learning from others, from people who came before him. But I think that this is all new territory right now. So I think that, he can get advice from all of these people, but the sort of world that we're all moving into, especially post-COVID, is different. And, I don't think any of us know exactly how, when we kind of come out from the wreckage of this, what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I'll end with one last thought there. Peter Thiel was, I think, the first institutional investor in Facebook, and he wrote the book on monopolies. So the fact that Brian is going to Obama, and the first and very instrumental institutional investor in Facebook was someone like Peter Thiel. And, like you said, Mark Zuckerberg and these people didn't set out to, let me, change democracies. Maybe that's the toolkit that Brian will take to.
I would also say that I think that we all have a collective responsibility too, which was, I think that in the past, and by we, I mean the media, but then also the people who use these products, we all sort of looked at, the Mark Zuckerbergs and, the Google guys and everyone and said, wow, isn't this what they're doing so amazing? And wherever you take us, we will follow, because the technology was so eye-popping and amazing. And I think that we now have a more collective responsibility to ask more questions and to be a little more cautious about how we approach these sort of tools that they're giving us, and maybe make more demands from the people leading the company to stick by their word and tell us, where they stand on issues and things like that. So I think it's sort of interesting, because I think like we as the public have a responsibility to, an agency in how we want to kind of deal with these big companies.
Yeah, I think like a push from the people is really what we need to have these companies work for the public, right? Like we have to be the stewards of this power as much as these CEOs are the stewards of that power. With that, I feel it's a pretty good spot to end.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for joining us, Katrina.
Thank you guys. You guys have been really fun.
This is the secret sauce of Airbnb. If you like our show, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. And be sure to tell your friends.
Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free.
You'll also find some links and offers from our sponsors in the episode notes. Please support them. By supporting them, you help us offer you this show for free. Another way you can support the show is filling out a small survey at wondery.com/survey.
I'm John Fry.
And I'm Samuel Donner. Our associate producer is Brian White. Our audio engineer is Sergio Enriquez. Our senior producer is Janine Cornello. Our executive producers are Stephanie Jens and Marshall Louie for Wondery.
Look no further than Wondery Plus for the perfect Mother's Day gift. She'll get to enjoy our hit podcast, Even the Rich, ad-free, and so much more. Each season offers an in-depth look at the lives and scandals of the rich and famous, like the Kardashians, Beyoncé and Jay-Z, and Britney Spears. Here's a quick preview. 20 cops storm into the house.
What the hell is going on?
That's what Lynn wants to know. One of the cops tells her, "We've got a 5150. Psychiatric hold. We're taking Britney in." This Mother's Day, give Wondery Plus by visiting WonderyPlus.com/mom. Wondery. Feel the story.